Welcome to the Crux of Cardio. I'm Jordan Burgin, Head of Cardiovascular at Crux. In 2024, I very nearly suffered a cardiac arrest due to an underlying illness. It was unexpected and it fundamentally changed how I look at the industry. Since joining Crux, my role has been simple but ambitious in practice: to strengthen the cardiovascular ecosystem by supporting the people building it through talent, through fundraising and through community, helping founders, executive clinicians and investors connect in ways that genuinely move the needle. We started the Crux of Cardio to spotlight the incredible work happening across the cardiovascular space, the technologies, the teams, the setbacks and the breakthroughs, and most importantly, the very real patient impact behind it all. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, my name is Jordan Burgin and I am the host of today's podcast, which is the Crux of Cardio. And today we are joined by an incredible CEO that I've been wanting to meet for a while now, which is Oliver Piepenstock, CEO of Noah Labs. I guess firstly, it'd be good to introduce yourself, Oliver.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. My name's Oliver, one of the three founders and the CEO of Berlin-based Noah Labs. I got a finance background. I started off in M&A, but I very soon into the job realized it's not what makes me happy. So I shifted to healthcare, inspired by my mom, who's a nurse, and built my first company in the elderly care space. So that was kind of my soft landing in healthcare. And once that company was up and running, I was basically ready for something even more medical, also with a technical edge. And I ended up joining a program called Entrepreneur First, basically this kind of founder speed dating. And as part of that program, I was fortunate to run into my two amazing co-founders, but more on them later on.
Interesting. So a finance background, stepped into healthcare. What was your degree in, if you don't mind me asking, what your studies were in beforehand?
It was really a master's, a quant finance kind of a program, so really like stock derivatives trading, then went into more M&A, like the software kind of finance side, right?
So nothing medical incorporated at all into it?
Not at all, except for family history, of course.
Well, quite the
family
unique
ties.
background then. And so tell me about that. It sounds like that your first company was inspired by your mother. What happened there?
Yeah, so my mom's a geriatric nurse, and I basically saw like how my parents received care, how they were bedridden at some point, and how difficult life can get at that age. And it made me think like how I could make a difference in their lives. And I started a care company that basically aimed for improved care for the elderly in their own homes, in their own surrounding, without having to move somewhere else, right? Because that's usually what you don't want to do when you're like 80, 90 plus years old.
And so that was your first venture into healthcare. How did that business go?
It went well. That company's profitable now. I still hold my shares. It was a non-VC case, fully bootstrapped. And my best mate and co-founder Simon's running it operationally. So I still got ties with them, but basically cheering from the sidelines now.
Very, very good. Well, it's a success story. Not all of them start out with success as first-time founders, so congratulations there. Tell me a little bit more about Noah Labs then. It'd be good to understand the origin of the business and really where it started.
Yeah, so when we founded the company in 2021, I just come out of that previous company, and I ran into Marcus at Entrepreneur First. So this was first sessions were online. We're doing like this founder roulette, so 5 minutes with all the other founders, and Marcus were basically sitting in his chair back home in his parents' place and telling me about his story at Harvard Med in Boston. So Marcus is a very talented AI developer, and he was working on MRI imaging kind of data, basically developing algorithms that automatically detect heart conditions and also plan the intervention based on imaging data. And that got us started. We started talking about like heart conditions. I came in more from a economic finance kind of perspective, looking at the market size, and the amount of patients, the size of the problem, and then we realized heart failure, which is now the topic that we focus on, is a huge market, and that we believe we can make a difference in that market.
It's one of the biggest markets in medical devices right now, in particular in cardiovascular. And so this was during COVID times when this conversation happened, and you started the business back in 2021, right?
We started in 2021, coming out of the Entrepreneur First program, the Berlin cohort.
Cool. And how was it started then? So it sounds like Marcus brought an idea forward. You had the finance background. How did that original idea come about and formulate? Did it require much planning and fundraising?
Yeah, so given Marcus' background in cardiovascular AI and my finance background, we basically started off by interviewing literally several hundred cardiologists around the world. So we were just calling up people, scheduling interviews, trying to understand their workflows, their problems. We narrowed down on heart failure as a condition, and just started developing our hypotheses and basically validating or devalidating them with all these people. And that was literally the beginning. And one of these calls was basically to a guy called Leo, who's now our medical co-founder. Back then, he was still practicing as a physician in the cardiology department at Charité Berlin. And we were interviewing him, and eventually we met up for coffee, and it took a few more months, but at some point he switched sides and he quit his clinical career.
What do you think it was that made him quit? What do you think made him excited about joining the Noah Labs journey?
Yeah, so I've had many conversations with Leo about why he quit his clinical career at Charité. The main reason why he quit Charité, I think, is the amount of patients he could possibly reach. Like as a physician, you might be treating, several hundred, several thousand patients a year. But with the technology we develop, he might impact like millions of lives around the world. So it's just like from that perspective, it's a big difference.
And whose idea was it? Because when we first spoke in London, I think was the first time we met in person, and you told me that you was diagnosed in heart failure through voice biomarkers. I thought that sounded absolutely insane. It sounded brilliant. So you spoke with over 200 cardiologists. How did it come about that you was going to go from there to there, and it was going to be through a voice channel that you was going to be able to solve this problem?
Quite honestly, I'd say the idea comes from all these cardiologists because they're used to the sound of a really congested heart failure patient walking into their clinic. It's something you can hear. Like if you know that voice, like say this was your mom or your dad, you would notice a difference like when you talk to them on the phone and they're like in a really congested state. Now, that's what cardiologists were used to already. So we basically started looking into this, like how early does voice change? Is there maybe something that the human ear cannot hear, like 2-3 weeks out, but the technology could possibly detect? And we realized, yes, there actually is something. So we started digging deeper, collecting more and more data, eventually running trials in this. And that's when it got really, really excited for us.
And trials, not always a success story in cardiovascular. It'd be good to find out how those things went for you in those early days.
Yeah, I mean, we started with some German data, being Berlin based. We were fortunate to get access to data that had already been collected by a very forward-looking, forward-thinking professor, essentially the boss of my now co-founder Leo. So that was our first step. And then in a second step, we of course wanted to go beyond the German language, because that's always a question that comes up. Like, does this work across languages, right? So we looked at the US and we wanted to get like a proper center, an academic center, like well reputed for a larger trial. And we were struggling, to be honest. Being a small 5 people startup from Berlin, pretending to be able to use AI to detect changes in voice. They were like not trusting us, right? So we found ourselves an advisor, a very well-connected guy that introduced us to Mayo Clinic. And basically we had barely any money left in the bank account. And that guy told me, hey, Oliver, you're going to book a flight ticket. You're going to go there to Rochester, Minnesota, in the middle of nowhere. And you're going to pitch them in person, because that's the only way to convince them. And I was like, yeah, sure. Couldn't we take a video call? Like, this would be way more capital efficient. But he said it's the only way to do it. So I went, and it did work out. So we pitched them, we convinced them. It still took some time, of course, like setting up a trial, getting the funding for the trial, so some fundraising in between. But it eventually worked out, and now we got some fantastic U.S. clinical data coming out of Mayo Clinic that's about to be published in a very well-reputed cardiac journal.
Incredible. So what feedback do you think changed the direction of the business most? It sounded like you was pretty linear in scale. It didn't seem like there was like massive growth or massive decline. It sounds like you were going through a pretty standard journey, but something clearly happened at Mayo Clinic or with the data. What do you think it was within that feedback that changed everything?
I personally wouldn't say it was linear. I mean, the first few years were very tough, right? It's an idea, and it's an idea that's tough to validate. If you're in imaging, there's tons of MRI, echo, or whatever kind of data, X-rays you want to use. But for us, it was difficult because there was no voice samples where there were labels about the status of a heart failure patient. So it took us a long time to deliver the initial proof. That Mayo thing, of course, accelerated things. Like once these big guys were looking at it and supporting it, that opened doors, man, like across the States, but also Europe. So some of the European centers, they started talking to us after we had the conversations with Mayo. So Mayo kind of also served as a validation for them.
I guess what I think is really intriguing about this is, it's such a wild idea and so different. What is the closest thing that people do currently to diagnose people with, congestive heart failure through the voices, or maybe not even through the voices?
Yeah, so the standard of care in heart failure management is the weight scale. You do your daily weight check. If there's a sudden rise, you basically suppose there's fluid overload in the human body. And that does work in a certain amount of cases, but the accuracy, of course, is not very high because, of course, weight changes for a billion reasons. And there can even be like a countering effect. Like your heart failure might be worsening, there's fluid built up, but at the same time, you don't feel very well. So you eat less, you lose weight, and then it levels out. But it basically shows how we haven't solved heart failure until today because we rely on a technology that's not very capable of catching patients early enough. So in fact, cardiologists and technologists have been searching for decades for a solution that solves heart failure, that detects worsening early on, like 2-3 weeks out before a hospitalization occurs.
Impressive, very impressive. And who's struggling the most without your solution? I know that heart failure doesn't, limit, it can affect anyone really, but there's got to be a dynamic amount of people or a certain amount of people that it highly affects.
Heart failure is a condition that mostly occurs in like 65 plus years and older, right? It's the result of almost every other cardiovascular condition. So heart attacks, high blood pressure, narrowing arteries, it all leads to a weakening of the muscle, which is what we call heart failure. So it tends to increase with age. So most prominent in like 70, 80, 90 years plus. Which of course comes with some challenges in terms of technology use. But what we basically do is we use smart devices. So it can be smartphones, can be tablets, but we've also recently moved to smart speakers, collecting voice samples more passively, which is easier, of course, for the elderly.
Interesting. You just made an interesting point there, and originally diagnosing people came from weight influx and weight changes. Surely that can happen with age anyway. As people get older, they become less active, more holidays, eat more food. So surely that makes the current standard of care way off in terms of validation because it could be any number of variables compared to this.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a tough one to diagnose, and there's so many factors that have an impact. As you said, as you rightly described, like with regards to like habits, in terms of nutrition, in terms of exercise, other comorbidities that might have an influence. Heart failure usually doesn't come alone. It's often accompanied by, like, say, diabetes, COPD, like in terms of the lungs, and other conditions.
Interesting. And in terms of I guess it's the accuracy to diagnostic. Is there any data out there that shows how much faster you guys are in terms of the current standard of care?
So the clinical trials that we've completed across the States and Europe, they basically showed that we can get to an accuracy, so sensitivity and specificity of close to 90% in catching worsening heart failure out 2 to 3 weeks before a hospitalization. In comparison, the standard of care, the weight scale, is typically a few days out. So we're talking like 7 days and less. And it's usually not enough time to adjust medication to catch a patient. So you might be able to observe the deterioration, but might not be able to fix it because it's already too advanced. And that's really the difference. Like 2-3 weeks out is just enough to fix it.
So that was actually leading to my next question, really, was like, what does a patient or clinician gain from that advantage? But you've kindly just touched on it a little bit. It's that time period of how quickly they can act on things. So that could be genuinely life-changing.
Yeah, that's the really interesting thing in heart failure. I mean, it's a massive problem, but it could be easily fixed, right? If you catch the patient early enough, it's usually an easy intervention. You don't need to see your clinician, your physician. You don't even need like structural intervention like surgery. It's usually a change in medication that can be administered from a distance. So it's the most part is about catching it, and then it's an easy fix.
An easy fix, some would say. But you've spoke with, you said 200 people before you even started the business. I would imagine it's in the thousands now within the cardiovascular space. How do doctors react or clinicians react the first time they hear about this?
So clinicians' reactions are actually quite interesting. Initially, we thought like they're gonna be like opposed, some weird guys claiming their eye could hear heart failure. But in fact, even like the clinicians in like, say, sub-Saharan Africa in the countryside, like they still agree and they're still like, yes, this makes sense because they're all used to the sound of the congested patient. So it's just obvious to them. And that makes it a lot easier for us to pitch the technology. It's actually a little more complex to explain it to a patient. They also do get it. Sometimes they've experienced congestion, so they know also how they feel and how their voice changes. It's something that's often observed by relatives. So a spouse might have observed that before, and that's usually when understanding sets in. But I'd say it's a little more difficult to explain to patients than to the physicians.
This is a super unique space. The first I heard of it was when we met in London. Who are the competitors? Is there anything out there that is, direct competition or even as close to it being used in other indications?
So there are a few companies working on similar technologies in heart failure. I say there's like 2-3 companies around the world besides us. Most of them in an earlier stage. So I'd say we're probably the most advanced one. There's another a firm that's close to the market, so similar to us. But I mean, there's literally like millions of heart failure patients. So I think there's room enough for like more than one company. Plus, in the end, I think algorithm performance is going to be the deciding factor in terms of adoption. When we look at other indications, that's where things get really exciting. I'd say voice analysis actually started in the mental disease space. So depression detection. That's when you focus not only on voice, on sound production, but also on the content of what is being said, right? And this is actually fairly established, I'd say. So there's a bunch of companies out there doing this. And from the mental disease space, it then kind of moved into the neurodegenerative space. So looking at Alzheimer's, looking at Parkinson's, where there's basically changes in the brain, right, that affect sound production. And only very recently it moved into cardiovascular, into cardiometabolic. And I think this is like all these spaces are relevant and important problems to solve. But in cardiovascular, we got the big chance of impacting in cardiovascular, the cool thing is that we can actually do something about, like, we can improve life expectancy. We can improve outcomes in terms of like reduced hospital admissions, reduced costs. If you catch patients early enough, whether it's heart failure or diabetes or COPD, there's a lot more you can do about it. In Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, it's a lot tougher.
Interesting. That's really interesting. And how has that been in terms of fundraising for you guys? You know, it sounds like you kind of leading the way for it. I think sometimes fundraising, it can go two ways. If you bring out there something that sounds so crazy, like Organox, for example, you know, an incredibly crazy company and idea, fundraising for them was great. You know, for you guys, again, a crazy idea, but there's a risk attached that it could be too crazy and people may look at it and not know what they want to do with it.
So fundraising is never easy, I'd say. And we've taken a more European path, meaning that we basically combine dilutive venture funding with non-dilutive grant funding. And given the research side of things, we've been very successful with public grants, so EIC accelerator money, but also local German government funding. And that's allowed us to basically, as founders, not give up too much shares in the company for now. So we can basically prove the case first, do the larger trials, show the outcomes, get to first adoption. And then at that point, once we need big money, only then take in like significant amounts of investor cash, right?
I'm interrupting this episode to bring you a word from our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical technology development with deep scientific and engineering expertise. They support ambitious medtech companies in solving high-risk, high-complexity challenges where there's no margin for error. Whether you're tackling uncharted technical territory or racing to bring a product to market, TTP provide clarity and direction. By de-risking innovation and ensuring seamless alignment with regulatory and manufacturing demands, TTP help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
Interesting. And whereabouts are you guys at in terms of that journey of fundraising right now?
So in terms of funding, Noah Labs just recently got another major grant funding from the state of Brandenburg, the area surrounding Berlin. So runway-wise, we're pretty good at the moment. But that being said, we're now nearing the point where it makes sense to take on bigger money and to scale the technology. So we're now pushing for deployment in health systems across the states in Europe to basically prove interventionally the case. So like not only retrospectively looking at data, but basically having clinicians intervene based on the alerts the voice system generates. So really fixing the patient, showing the hard outcome. And at that point, it just makes sense to get the financial means to scale.
Amazing. What do you think is the next big milestone for the company?
Our next big milestone's going to be FDA and European MDR clearance. So getting official approval, being able to sell the technology is the most important next step.
And you're doing that bilaterally at the same time?
Noah Labs has decided on a dual strategy. So we're going for both FDA and MDR at the same time. It will not come in at the exact same month, but it's probably going to be a little faster in Europe. That's an interesting one. The European perspective on AI-based medical devices is a little more hands-off, I would say, compared with the FDA. So requirements in terms of data set segregation and this kind of stuff is a little stricter in the States. They understand AI a little better, I'd say.
So why do you think that is? What causes that difference between the European governance and the US governance?
The advantage that the FDA has, it's a centralized body. So there's a lot of expertise in one center, right, in one organization. In Europe, it's discarded across all the different countries. And even within the different countries, there's many different notified bodies. Those are basically the organizations that check medical devices and they get you approval. And these are like business players. They got to play by the rules. But just because there's so many, they're lacking knowledge. And some of them are a bit knowledgeable in the AI game, but many of them are not. So the FDA is just more advanced on the AI side.
Such a unique approach. I find that so many companies now go one way or the other, and even more so since I got into medical devices back in 2018. The typical route was always through Europe. US companies would come here, get CE mark, get their clinical data, try and build up their business and get it into a better position, and then launch back in the US. To do this bilaterally now is pretty incredible and insane in our current market. So, kudos to you guys. I guess that sort of leads on to an area that I wanted to touch on. So you want to launch into the US and you want to launch into Europe as well. What kind of company are you actually looking to build?
That's an excellent question, Jordan. And in all transparency, we're still working on the exact structure. I mean, for now, we're a med tech company in the sense that we build regulated software. But the big question in the end is, we talked a lot about fixing the patient, right? Catching them early enough, but then fixing it. And that raises the question, like, are we going to sell software to physicians, enabling them to fix the patient? Or is that going to be like a full service kind of offering where we move more towards payers, to insurers, the NHS or whoever it is, and basically offer them a package of, hey, we're going to monitor your patient, catch them early and fix them, capturing basically more of the value the technology creates. So it's a pretty key question, and quite frankly, I'm still working on it with my co-founders, figuring that out.
Interesting. One thing that you mentioned to me that was important, though, on your journey as you grow is that you want to create a great culture, which is, I think, a massive thing for any startup. It's so hard to attract talent these days. You've either got to have an extremely compelling story, an incredible culture. They probably are the two main biggest things. So what is it that you guys are trying to build over there?
I think everyone who's been building in healthcare is in kind of a fortunate position, because it's purpose that you're offering in addition to whatever the job is, right? And the pay is. I feel like there's more and more people really on a mission out there, and some of them quitting their well-paying, well-respected jobs with the big tech companies and stuff, and basically going with smaller healthcare startups because they want to make an impact. They want to make a difference in people's lives. And I think this is a huge opportunity. And if you're able to offer that, to sell that in a way to your candidates, I think that's just fantastic. In addition to this, what we do at Noah Labs is we're like utterly transparent. So there's basically nothing we don't share within the company. Everyone knows the money that's left in the bank account. Everyone knows about the investor conversations that we're having. Everyone knows about the study fuck-ups, the things that go wrong, right? So like that level of transparency, it can be scary at times, right? When the bank account approaches zero. But it also creates trust, a level of trust that is hard to beat. That way, like even when things get worse, like people do trust you with your decision power, with the path you take, and they don't let you down. So this is something that I'd highly recommend to everyone else out there.
I love that. And I've spoke with a company in the past that do something very similar, and they call it radical transparency. And I think that term resonated with me the whole time because you really couldn't be more transparent there. Almost a little bit scary at times, I can imagine. But, kudos to you guys. I think that's incredible. And I think it's something that a lot of companies don't do these days. So, if you want to stand out from the crowd, that's no better way of doing it. With the kind of people that you're going to be hiring then, what values are non-negotiable?
So at Noah Labs, in terms of our values, the patient comes first. You gotta care about the patient. We do sell to physicians, and in the end, it's the health system or the payer that's gonna benefit. But our primary user and target group is the patient. So them we gotta make happy, and that's the first criterion in a selection process for like hiring people. A second item that's like super important to us at Noah Labs is what we refer to as kindness. It's something that the three founders, so Leo, Marcus, and I, really share. And it's this belief of being kind to each other, not only internally, also in working with investors, in working with partners, like caring about the other side, trying to understand them, what motivates, what demotivates them, and just being like nice and genuine. I've made the experience that this really makes a difference also from a business perspective. Like, I believe we've won some contracts because of the personal connection that we were able to build with people. So this is a huge value that we also want to bring to the team and that we want the whole company to embody to the outside world.
It's very interesting. The part that I always find interesting with these conversations is, and in particular for you guys, normally companies are going either to the US or going to scale further into Europe. You're essentially going to be doing both, not necessarily at the same time, but at similar times. How do you plan to keep those values and culture connected as the team doubles, triples, quadruples in these amazing cases it could end up being?
It can be quite a challenge scaling values. And to be honest, we'll have to see about it. I mean, of course, we wrote them down and they're like hanging in our office, like they're framed and they're illustrated, like we haven't had an artist working on them. We have regular sessions where we talk through the values. We got our Friday kudos, basically giving kudos to each other where we refer to values. So we're basically trying to have them like really implemented into our daily processes and also into the hiring processes, as we talked about it before. So that seems to be a way to make sure they grow forward. But quite honestly, it's going to be a challenge at some point for sure. And what you probably will have to do, or we will have to do, is we will have to let people go that don't embody these values. They might be delivering like 120% performance, but we might still have to let them go.
Very interesting.
And it has happened in the past too.
Good. If you really truly embody it, it's one of those things that people have to understand when they join their business. And if you drill that into them from first interview to final interview and let them know that you will stand by those values and cultures, it has to be expected as well. So if it's something you're truly incorporating, I can't see it being a surprise for them. The thing that I'm going to find, really interesting in this is, and this is probably a question more to you, what do you value more as you grow as a business? Is it speed? Is it perfection? Or is it this trust element that you're, aiming to grow with?
In healthcare, it's really about speed. I mean, in healthcare, you got to make sure you get it right. And getting it right means like achieving clinical performance in clinical trials, getting the trust of physicians, getting the trust of patients, and then making your economic case with a payer. And that's a long road. Of course, you want to be as fast as possible, and investors are going to put pressure on you because they want to see their returns. But it's healthcare after all, and healthcare goes by its own rules. So I'd say it's all about getting it right, building the trust, and putting the patient first. That's what eventually is going to lead to success. And a second aspect that I'd like to tell more of the healthcare companies out there, especially the startup companies. I think what really, really beats everything in the end is strong evidence. I know clinical trials are tough and expensive and take time, but it's the one thing that convinces clinicians, payers, and in the end, even patients to adopt the technology.
What are you going to do about that? How are you going to be the person that leads the way with that then and be different and stand out from the crowd?
Well, Noah Labs has completed 2 clinical trials, is running another 2 clinical trials, and that's not even including the pivotal trials that will get us market clearance in the US and the FDA. So by the time we're on the market, there will be 6 trials completed. And that's a huge amount of evidence considering we're such a small organization.
In terms of the patients that your trials are done with, so I've not looked into this. I know that often in cardiovascular, it's people that are sort of end of life care and they're in like a further disease state. With heart failure, you'd be a little bit different. How does that affect the patient enrollment and the people that are available to join your trial? Heart
failure, unfortunately, is very present. So every cardiovascular department has tons of heart failure patients. And in fact, after hypertension, after high blood pressure, it's the most common cardiovascular condition. And it is the number one admission reason in the elderly. And that also makes it the number one cost driver for every health insurer in the world. So there's just a ton of patients out there. Of course, there are a few ones that might not be suitable, that might not be able to speak for some reason. So for them, it will be more difficult to participate in such a program. But other than them, I'd say like 99% of the heart failure patients could benefit from this technology.
Amazing. Where do you see the business being in 5 years? You said that you haven't been having these conversations and internally, so I can imagine there's lots of different directions this business go. What's the consensus? Where do you guys want to be? Do you want to end up being IPO? Do you guys want to end up being acquired? What sort of fork in the road are you at right now?
So in terms of where we want to be in like a few years, like whether it's going to be IPO or an acquisition, frankly, I don't know. I mean, Leo Marcus and I, we talk about this a lot, but it's not something you can really plan for. I mean, IPO usually happens when there's lots of revenue. M&A, an acquisition can happen even if there's little revenue, but great technology or patents. Sometimes they might just buy and shelve you because they don't want you to continue because they're scared you might jeopardize their own technologies, right? There's all sorts of reasons for acquisitions. I'd say in general, we're in for the long run. Like we want to make sure this technology gets to the millions of heart failure patients out there and basically allows them to live longer and live healthier lives.
Amazing. And it's funny, actually, we had this discussion at MedTech Malta the other night. I was out for dinner with a few other CEOs, and this discussion was a thing. It was, does a CEO have a plan in mind from day one? And a lot of people like, they either want to IPO or they want to go down this route. You can't change. So it's funny that you've answered that. It sounds like there's actually a bit counterintuitive. There's times when no one knows actually. No, they're just going to take the job as it goes, see how the product develops, see how the clinical data develops, see how the launches go. So I suppose you've got a long road ahead with going into Europe and the US. Where do you see, I guess, the more clinical value being added? Do you think this is going to be a more breakthrough device in Europe or the US?
I'd say the technology overall is very breakthrough in both markets. The US tends to be a lot more tech savvy and more adoption friendly. Like health insurers tend to move quicker, establish reimbursement for new technologies. So that's why we're betting a little more on the US versus Europe. I know the German healthcare system very well, and unfortunately, that's not a fast-moving system. So there's tons of heart failure patients that I would like to ship this to, but it's going to be a very tough sell with insurers. So I think it's just the systems that limit adoption to a certain extent, the way they're structured and the way politics put them into place.
Amazing. And you probably know the data here. In terms of heart failure patients, how many people are affected by this in the US and Europe per year?
It's more than 10 million patients across the states in Europe. So it's a huge population. And the interesting thing is in Europe, there's more diagnosed with heart failure because there's more diagnostics being done. So Germany alone has almost 4 million patients. In the US, it's supposed to be 6 million, but the unofficial number is probably got to be a lot higher. There's just many patients that don't go see a cardiologist, that don't get an ultrasound of the heart and echo reading. So it might go unnoticed for a long time until they end up very congested in the hospital.
The thing that I find interesting with this, because it's the kind of devices that you've got, is in terms of rollout, you know, it should be fairly fluid, correct? Or am I misconceived there?
I mean, it is quite scalable, right? In the end, it's a smartphone application. Technology can be deployed anywhere where there's a smart device. So yes, I believe it is fluid.
Any headaches you can see going along the way with that?
My biggest headache are like TVs and radios in the background. So basically filtering out ambient noise, that's a tough one. And that's obviously something that impacts algorithm performance.
Brilliant. What sort of does this fall under? Like, what classification of device does it fall under? Well, you have two devices, right?
So under European MDR regulation, it's a class 2B medical device. So a bit on the higher end. higher risk, because if it's wrong, the technology, then the patient can suffer quite significantly from it. And I guess the US looks at it from a similar point of view.
That's interesting. I think a lot of people hear like the classifications and presume that's based on, it being implantable, etc., not in terms of the actual patient risk of being misdiagnosed, etc. So very interesting. I've not really thought about it that way. One thing that I did want to touch on is, the AI market and the software market is completely different to anything. And I've noticed that there is companies that really find fundraising easier in it, and there's companies that find it as a struggle. What's the adoption been like from venture capital and companies investors as you speak about this product and scaling?
So venture capital funding for AI, of course, is it fluctuates a bit, but right now we're in a hype, I think. In healthcare, I would say so too, but it depends a bit on whether it's regulated healthcare or not. So like in these voice transcription kind of businesses where you basically transcribe like physician-patient interaction, I think we're seeing like huge rounds at the moment, especially in the States. On our end, where we're like regulated, like we're going to get FDA clearance and stuff, I'd say people are more selective, a little more hesitant, because of course it does take longer. It might still show the same adoption rates or even crazier, but I think that only happens once you have clearance. So until market clearance hits, it's a more of a difficult game, and that's why we really appreciate like the European bodies supporting with non-dilutive grant funding.
What's the biggest kickback you've been getting when having these investor conversations?
What do you mean by kickback? Like in terms of like what they're not happy with?
Yeah, maybe things that they're not even unhappy with, but maybe unsure of. It's a fairly new market, so a lot of people may feel uncomfortable with these kind of conversations because it's not something they're fluent with.
So I'd say what investors are most concerned about initially is like adoption. Like, is this legit? Are physicians going to believe in this? And then usually they do like a reference call or two with some cardiologists, and then the cardiologists go like thumbs up. Of course, like I've had congested patients in my practice. I know how their voices change. And then the investors get a lot happier. So that's usually the first one that comes up. And I'd say the second one is really medical device clearance. So really understanding processes of how to get to MDR and FDA approval, and showing them you exactly know how to navigate the path. You got the right partners in place in terms of generating clinical evidence, but also in terms of regulatory advisory. People that not only help you get through FDA clearance, but that also help you figure out a payment path in terms of reimbursement, in terms of coding.
Interesting. And then I hope I'm not poking too far here. In terms of what's next for you guys, are you going to be upgrading products? Is it going to be trying to find yourself in other indications? What do you guys see doing as your next advancements if things go well in Europe and the US?
So for now, NoaLab stays very focused on solving congestive heart failure. And I think what will happen next, like in a few years down the road, is we're within heart failure, we'll try to move earlier. Like what we're doing right now is secondary prevention, right? The patients already have their diagnosis. We're trying to keep them out of the hospital. Ideally, this technology would help catch patients even earlier before heart failure becomes severe. So just like keeping them in an early stage or moving more into the preventive space. I think that's where we're headed next. And only after that, like a bit further into the future, we would be looking at other conditions, comorbidities that usually come alongside heart failure. So things like diabetes, like renal failure, like COPD, because all these diseases are known by now to lead to vocal changes, to voice changes as well. There's a growing body of evidence of clinical trials that confirm this relationship. So if you want to look into this, like there's a great paper in Mayo Proceedings looking at diabetes and changes in voice. And also like a paper on if you go with vowels, if you go like ah for a moment, you can compute a heartbeat from that. And once you got two heartbeats, you can calculate whether it's regular or irregular. So you may be able to detect atrial fibrillation. And I think this is where it gets really, really exciting. So there's a ton more to voice analysis than people imagine today.
How does that get affected with the, you mentioned earlier, so one of the things you had kickbacks on earlier was languages and things like that. Is it truly agnostic? Because you mentioned there like vowels, like surely that might sound different in a different country. How does it work on that?
It's really interesting because voice analysis in cardiovascular, we don't care about what is being said. We purely look at sound production. So we look at the lungs in terms of a resonance body, like the guitar, right? And the vocal tract, the vocal folds. You can think of them as the strings of the guitar and how sound production changes. So think of it like pouring sand or water into a guitar. Resonance is going to be different, right? Sound waves are going to travel differently. And if the strings get thicker or thinner, sound production is going to change. So that's the way we think of it.
I guess for me, like one thing that I find is interesting is you've had a success story in your first startup. You've had what looks like a pretty successful start in your second. What's your biggest advice that you would give to a new medtech founder? Because they don't always go great.
Big advice for medtech founders. The first one is like get the clinical evidence, go the extra mile, find the extra money to really build that evidence body. And you can start small. You can start like find yourself a nice university medical center and do like a 10 and 20 patient study to show first data. And then you show that to your investor and you build upon it and you raise some additional money and run a larger trial. So just stack it if that's what you need to do. But build that evidence. And I think the second aspect is really stamina. Healthcare it's a freaking long game. So you got to be aware of that and you got to plan for it. It's a marathon, not a sprint. There's rarely any hyperscaling in healthcare. So in anything that you do, plan for the long run. The way you hire your team, try to get it right. And if you don't feel like it's the right person yet, just go without them, even if that means like more work on you for another 2 months.
One thing that I think is clearly for you is you're very patient focused. You want to have a massive impact on how people get diagnosed and have an impact on that market. But aside from that, what do you want Noah Labs to be known as in 10 years' time? What would be like the perfect end to this story?
I want Noah Labs to be the first ones in the world to launch a voice biomarker that can hear worsening heart failure and that touches millions of lives, enabling them to live longer and to live happier.
Fantastic. Very well articulated and straight to the point with it. And probably the last question of the podcast today for me is, what impact do you want your culture to have on the wider medtech industry? And the reason I say that is you mentioned previously how important culture is going to be as you grow and scale and develop. Radical transparency and your other values they're not common in medtech. So what do you think you want to do? Do you want to lead by example?
So I feel like in the medical world, everyone talks about the patient, but not everyone actually means and refers to the patient and thinks patient first. And I think that's got to change. Because in the end, that's going to produce better results, like even economically, if you put the patient first. If you actually solve it for the patient, you're also going to solve it eventually for the physician and for the healthcare system or the payer that pays for it. So I think it just makes sense to focus more on that aspect.
And so you think that obviously having that culture within the business is going to then project that into the market as well then?
Exactly.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. I can't thank you enough for joining us. And what would be really interesting if you could post those journals into the comments once we publish this video. It'd be good so that people can really look into it because it's truly a unique market that I don't think anyone really has even scratched the surface on or maybe even thought about. So I think I know myself, I'll be having a read of them. So it'd be great if you could post them as well, Oliver.
Very happy to. Thanks for having me, Jordan.
Thanks for listening to the Crux of Cardio. If there's one thing this space has taught me, both personally and professionally, it's that progress in cardiovascular care is never the result of one individual. It's built by ecosystems, by teams, by people willing to take the long bets on hard problems. At Crux, our mission is to support that ecosystem through talent, capital and community. The podcast is one small part of that effort, a place to share the real stories from people shaping the future of cardiovascular care. If you found value in today's conversation, I would love for you to follow the show and share it with someone building in this space. And if you're a founder, operator or investor working on something meaningful in the cardiovascular care space, we'd love to hear from you.